Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, and welcome back to the Great Movie Ride Podcast. I am your host, Gaston, joined, of course, my co-host, Jerryofdom. No guest stars. And we are talking this week about Denis Villeneuve's Dune.
Dune.
Yes.
Dune.
So, would you like to kick us off with your previewing thoughts on Dune?
I knew nothing about this movie. I just knew there was a lot of actors, and I went, what's so interesting about a Dune? And I literally had no view of it. I didn't even know it was based off a book.
It was clearly well versed going into.
Everyone was just like, hey, it looks epic. Hey, I want to see it. I went, yeah, it does look good. I know nothing about it, so let's see what it's like.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Before we get further into it, if you enjoy the Great Movie Ride podcast, make sure to keep up with it. We have a YouTube channel as well as where we get podcasts at, see other episodes. Of course, we are sponsored by the Gmod Squad YouTube channel, which also streams on Twitch at the Gmod Squad Presents. Be sure to
Are we
check
getting
it all
paid
out.
by Gmod Squad?
We are part of Gmod Squad, genius.
But if we're sponsored by it, we should be earning money from them.
We would just be paying ourselves.
Pay me $200 for being a part of this.
And disconnecting you.
I'm joking. I'm joking.
I was not planning on seeing this movie at all. I had seen the original from 1984, and it is one of, if not my least favorite film of all time. Not just because the film does a terrible job of explaining what is happening and why it's happening. It is poorly acted, with poor graphics, terrible writing. It was just a mess.
Graphics. They didn't even know what that was back then.
Oh, they tried. The trailers, however, for the new film looked solid, and visually they looked quite good. And then the reviews came out. They were good reviews, solid reviews, and everybody I talked to for like 2 weeks had all went and seen this movie and was like, you have to go and see Dune. That includes my co-host, that includes Crunchy and Iron and everybody I talked to. You have to go see Dune. So almost 2 months after the movie was released, I went and saw Dune in the theaters because apparently you had to see it in the theaters. So buckle up, as there is quite a lot to talk about to try and explain to you, the listener, what is happening. So let's get to the plotline spoilers, where I do my best to sum this up. Set in the distant future, the galaxy runs on spice, the most valuable resource in the galaxy, as is used for interstellar travel. It is harvested on the planet Arrakis, ruled by the villainous Harkonnens. When House Atreides is given Arrakis by the Emperor, Duke Lido Atreides attempts to bridge the gap between the native people and them. His son, Paul Atreides, is actually the Kwisatz Haderach, a messianic figure for the people to rally behind. Paul is plagued by visions of the future and is determined to learn what it all means. That's my best shot at the light spoiler plot sum up of Dune, at least part one.
It just throws you right into it immediately. There is no guiding. There is nothing to be like, oh hey. No, it's just like, here you go. Here's a movie.
And yet, what it does so well is it doesn't feel, you don't get lost like you do with the original. But it does a very good job of making you understand what's happening. Like, I didn't feel lost watching this one, even though they just throw
me
you
with
into
my
it.
tiny brain. I was kind of confused, but like I was figuring it out along the way. I'm like, okay.
Fair. So let's dive into our character and actor review. And yeah, this is a big one. Because there are many characters, and this was an incredibly stacked cast.
Yeah.
So let's start with the lead character, Paul Atreides.
Thanos.
Paul Atreides, who is portrayed by Timothée Chalamet. He is the ducal heir of House Atreides. Would you like to start with Paul?
I didn't know what to expect. I don't know much of about him as an actor per se, but he conveyed a very interesting character that I enjoy, you know. And he gave off this character that has this mystery behind him that even he doesn't know, and he is figuring that out throughout the movie. He hasn't figured it out completely by the end, but he is having these pieces thrown at him, and he conveys that confusion yet trying to understand it well. It doesn't feel like this character is poorly written as to they're confused and they don't know what they're doing. It is an actual confusion, like an actual character. And the way he's portrayed, because he is supposed to be trained, he's the son of
Duke.
a duke, that's right. And so he should be well trained and all that. And they show that he is well trained, he's good with the weapons, he's good with stuff. And he's a very knowledgeable person. He is very scholar-like because he looks into books, he's looking into knowledge, like he finds out about things when he wants to. And it sets up like a good leader in the future if he was to be one. And it's all very interesting because he is still just a teenager or maybe a young adult from where they play him off.
Yeah. Yeah, I have not seen Timothy Chalamet in anything else, but I know of him, and I've heard that he is given just a string of stellar performances in the last few years. And this is my first time seeing him in action, and yeah, he is a fantastic actor who plays this troubled young man. And his performance has this like steady calmness that is super easy to like rally behind. He is so calm in that way. And the thing I found interesting with Paul is he has no real charisma to him, but that's the point. I'm not saying that Timothy Chalamet can't do charisma. It's that is not where Paul's at in his life yet. He's still that awkward teenage young adult stage, and he's had this sheltered existence from being the son of a duke. So he's not there in his arc yet, but you can definitely see, as you mentioned, the start of him becoming a very good leader, and
I
that'll come
also
along.
like how because he's not aware of half the powers he has. Like he is aware of them, but he doesn't understand them too much. And in the beginning of the movie, they start to show off like where it comes from, though not fully explaining it. So there's still this mystery behind it, and it's the same mystery we have. He has. He is still confused on why he has and the full meaning. So you feel connected to this character.
Yeah, it's through Paul's eyes that we learn about this universe, and it's done very well.
Fine.
So let's talk about Lady Jessica, who is portrayed by Rebecca Ferguson, Paul's Bene Gesserit mother and consort to Duke Lido. So let's start this by briefly explaining what the Bene Gesserit is, to the best that I got. The Bene Gesserit is like this elite order of, it's supposed to be all women, and they are like these elite assassins, and they have this power called the voice, which is essentially a sound they can emit from their voice box that can influence and manipulate other people's actions against their will. It's pretty cool. The movie doesn't do a ton to explain what Bene Gesserit is, so this is kind of like from seeing the original film where it was even worse explained, and seeing this one, trying to give that to you guys, because there's a lot of terms that we'll have to explain. I'll start with Lady Jessica, and hot take, I was not a fan of Rebecca Ferguson's portrayal of the character.
Really?
Yeah, to me, she came across as quite whiny and annoying. And it just seems like she spent the entire movie crying. And the writing would indicate that that was too much for the type of character she was supposed to be. It's undoubtedly a hot take, but she was my least favorite character in the film. I will, however, say her performance when it is her and Paul inside a tent towards the end of the film that I can't explain what was happening till we get heavy spoilers, that was really, really good acting. That scene was great. Nick.
I can understand what you're saying. I had a bit of a different view on her. I actually enjoyed her character, and I didn't think she was super whiny because a lot of it is related to like her son being either like tortured or something is happening to him that isn't the greatest, to when she is reacting like that. And it reminds me of a mother, how they would feel if they heard their son in pain, or if they heard their child having something done to them, and they are like, what the crap, you know? Because I've seen it firsthand, you know? It felt like a mother to me. That's why I don't have such a bad view. But I think they emphasize so much on the motherliness that from what she actually is, I think that takes away from it a bit.
And the portrayal could have been completely accurate to the book. I have never seen it.
Yeah.
Just to establish that. I'm not saying that.
I'm
Oh,
interested to read the book now after watching
yeah.
this movie. Like,
So let's talk about Duke Lido Atreides, who is portrayed by Oscar Isaac. Paul's father and the Duke of House Atreides, bestowed with the stewardship of Arrakis. And why don't you kick off the talk about Lido?
he's a cool guy. You know, he seemed like this guy that was ready to do business no matter what. You know, he's always prepared and he always seemed ready. It seemed like what a duke should be because he is the captain of an entire nation. Basically, it's not a nation, but you know what I'm saying. And what is happening with my ping?
My ping just tanked as
It's
well.
600 right now.
Yeah, so's mine.
Oh boy. Oh.
Oh, I'm down
I
to
don't
4.
know. Is everyone's ping just died? I'm at 500 right now.
There's snow squalls in our area tonight, so that...
200.
Oh, I'm back. I'm back.
Okay, I'm slowly dropping.
Yeah,
Okay, I think we've recovered now.
I'm back below 100 and I'm in the green. I'm at 43, so...
I'm at 65 and continuing to drop. So.
Alright.
I was just like, oh my goodness, everyone's fuzzy, and I'm at 600 ping.
At the same time, we just died internet-wise.
Everyone, it just boom. I'm like, oh.
Well, what do you know?
Anyways, from what I was saying, he was a good leader, you know. And he still had that father side to him, caring about his son. That's what I really appreciated about both the parents to him, is they felt like parents. You know, you see a lot of movies where it's royalty and all that, and yes, back in those times, they might have treated their kids like garbage and all that, but this felt like what a parent of this recognition only, and they only having one kid, this is what it should feel like. Because without that one kid, there is no continuity of that bloodline.
Mm.
So they should treat that kid as a child and as their kid.
Yeah.
And it's done well. He shows good leadership in the room, and everyone respects him. And he doesn't, he's very humble about things, and I like
that. Yeah. Gaston here to dish up what might be another hot take, another one that I'm not sorry about, but Oscar Isaac is one of the most underrated actors on the planet today. And if that's a hot take to you, I'm not sorry. He is so good. And he plays this stoical character so very well. And his performance, there is not a single moment in the film where you're like, his performance isn't that great here. It is just stellar all throughout. His shining scene, when he has that conversation with Paul on the shores of their home that they're leaving, dang, right in the feels. He is my favorite character in the film by far. And Oscar Isaac, from someone who first saw Oscar Isaac playing the Han Solo-like Poe Dameron, this was like the opposite of Poe. But he can do it all. He is so very good as an actor. Just wow.
I think a lot of downfall in Oscar Isaac as an actor was just because of Rise of Skywalker and being like,
that's not his fault.
I know, but people that don't think about it too deeply and they just see it from the actor's point of view, because I can even relate that a few years ago, I wouldn't think about writing and directors and all that. It was just like, these actors, why aren't they doing a better job?
Yeah.
But even then, it's still a kid, and you're just like, oh, I'm enjoying the movie. But you look at it now, he was trying. You could see that he enjoyed trying what he was doing.
I'd be like,
you're giving a horrible script.
just look at the look on his face when he has to say somehow Palpatine returned. Like, you can tell he does not want to say this line because it is so dumb. But that is another review for another time. So let's talk about Gurney Halleck, who is portrayed by Josh Brolin. He is the weapons master of House Atreides and one of Paul's mentors. And Josh Brolin absolutely nails the role. Patrick Stewart played the character in the original film, and that was the only part of the original I liked because Patrick Stewart is Patrick Stewart. But Brolin is more than a worthy successor for the role, and like his voice, like it
It gives
really,
off a general.
yeah, and it really just like hammers in the point that he wasn't manipulating his voice for Thanos at all. It's just his voice, and it is so well done. He was a very enjoyable part of the film. Great performance.
He gives off this way of just being of authority, you know? When he sees someone, he's supposed to be that personal guard for the Duke. And when you see someone that might disrespect him a little or all that, he reacts. He gives off this vibe of, you better stop that right now, buddy, or else, you know? He understands respect and he understands how loyalty should work. And he portrays his character great. And he shows that, like, this character is a threat if you were stuck one on one with him.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to be stuck on that.
His action sequences are really, really well done. But not the best action sequence in the film, more on that later. Let's talk about Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, played by Stellan Skarsgård. He is the Baron of House Harkonnen, enemy of House Atreides, and the former steward of Arrakis. He is our main villain, and would you like to start talking about the Baron?
It was definitely interesting when you're sitting in a theater with your mom and that thing pops out, and you're like, "Oh, wow, this is a little awkward." But he was gross. He was disgusting, like he should be.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't given that vibe for no reason,
Mm-hmm.
and he does it well. Every scene you're like, "Ugh, he's gross." But he still feels threatening to you, and you're like, I don't want to deal with that guy because he will eat me.
Yeah, Skarsgård is not on screen for very long. Not much of this movie at all. But he definitely has an impact. Every time he's on screen with his gravelly voice, when how he's talking, and it has this intense screen presence that there's just this menace and dread that just kind of exude from him. That he doesn't have to be on screen much for him to be a memorable villain and a memorable part of the story. Now, I was told that apparently he wasn't big enough from my friends who had seen the film. Apparently he was described as much bigger in the book, but it's no matter to me.
No.
And he floats around a lot. He's like a balloon. And there's the one shot where he's wearing that clothing thing that's super long at the bottom. So I'm like, oh look, it's a balloon. It's like the string going down. So let's talk about Glossu Rabin. I hope I said that one right, which was portrayed by Dave Bautista. He is the nephew of Baron Harkonnen, and he's another character who doesn't have a lot of screen time. It's interesting, most of the villains don't, and at least in part one. But boy, does Bautista act his heart out in the few scenes he's got. He scares you, and you know he's dangerous. And he doesn't have much to do. But the very few things you see him do in action is so cruel and menacing. It's like, dang, that was very effective.
I was surprised at how strong, like, for a PG-13 movie, the violence was stronger than expected. And you're sitting there with your mom as Dave Bautista's beheading people, and you're like, I hope she's alright.
Yeah, I hear that.
She got jump scared a few times in this movie. It's quite entertaining.
Yeah, I can see where. There's a few moments where, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
And in his introductory scene, where he starts talking like normally, and then he just breaks into a shout, that's an attention grabber right there. It's like, whoa.
Like, oh, this guy means business.
Anything else you want to say?
Again, you put it. He's menacing. He is a threat. Like, just that short amount of time. If they flesh, I don't know if the book fleshes him out more, and if it did, I don't know.
I seem to remember in the original he's in the rest of the film and dies towards the end. Whether or not that's still the case because some things change in adaptation, so I don't know.
Yeah.
At least
But
I think he does.
I hope he shows up a bit more. That'd be good.
So let's talk about a name I will probably butcher, Thufir Hawat, or Haywit, or Haywat, played by Stephen McKinley Henderson. He is the Mentat, or Mentat, of House Atreides. So, quick explanation of what that is. A Mentat, however it's said, is essentially a human who was trained from birth to be a computer. Because in the Dune universe, they do not trust computers anymore because of whatever happened that caused the galaxy to become the way it is. The Mentat, I did a lot of research getting ready for this because they don't tell you this in the film. The Mentat are able to do complex calculations in their head. In case you can't picture who he is, he's the black guy with the beard. I don't know if I think they say his name once in the film.
Is he the general?
Yeah, he's the leader of the guards. The old black guy who
Oh,
Paul goes up and gives him a hug when they arrive on Arrakis.
he's not necessarily black, but yeah, I know what you mean.
He is of African American heritage.
Okay.
um, and we'll talk about the Mentat of House Harkonnen later. Or Harkonnen, sorry. Would you like to go first about this lovable old man?
Yeah, he felt like this nice old uncle that everyone loves, and that scene where, as you said, I didn't know they're trying to put to be like computers or calculator type things. So when I see his eyes just roll up into his head, I'm like,
Yeah, what are you
what?
doing over there?
What's happening? Why are his eyes just you know? But I enjoyed him. He again shows that sense of royalty, like Josh Brolin's character, and he doesn't feel like a threat, but he does feel like intelligence-wise he's a threat.
Yeah. He's not in this movie much either. We've pretty much gone through all the characters who are in it a lot. And now we're just essentially checking off the various names that were pretty important. And the thing with this character is he is just a really nice character. I loved his relationship with Paul. They had a nice rapport. He's charming. He's got this grandfather-like, uncle-like persona. And I can't remember the character in the original. He may have been cut from the original. I don't know if he appears again or not. Maybe. But I did like the character. So let's talk about Shawnee, which is Zendaya. A mysterious Fremen. The Fremen are the native inhabitants of Arrakis who are accustomed to living in the hostile sand-like environment. As you can see, I did a ton of research for this because we were expecting to have 2 Dune expert guest stars. Who aren't here. So I have to bear the brunt of this knowledge. I was reading it to keep up with that, but now I've just got to hope I'm presenting it correctly. So she's a mysterious Fremen woman who appears in Paul's visions. And I just gotta say that I think people will be surprised how little Zendaya is in this film. Because she is front and center of the marketing. She only shows up in the present for the last 15 minutes, just about.
I was not expecting that. Like, she's shown a lot of like scenes like that are there, but they aren't like scenes to the story. They're
dreams.
The main character, yeah, vision dreams.
Yeah, and as such, because she's there for just such a short period of time, she is not given very much to do. But it's hard to judge her harshly, as undoubtedly she will be the focus of what comes next.
Oh yeah.
Zendaya does fine with what she's given. She's just not in it much.
Yeah, there's not a lot to add. Like, the few scenes she's shown, they're interesting because there's not a lot of context brought to them. But when you see those scenes and then you see the characters themselves, it'll be interesting for when they make the second one, what she does and what the context of these visions are.
Yeah. So let's talk about Peter de Vries, who's played by David Dastmalchian, who is the Mentat of House Harkonnen. Bald guy. Kurt from Ant-Man.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
Yeah, there's not a lot to talk about him.
See, I disagree. Um, I think first off, I think Des Melchian is another underrated actor who
Yeah.
was cast in this film, and I thought he was very good in this film. He's this, to steal a Marvel term, he's this Ebony Maw like character. With a similar impact into the story and into the audiences, and also similar screen time. He's not in it much, but he acts very much as the spokesperson for the Baron. The
Yeah.
Baron doesn't talk much, so Peter DeVries does. And he just reminded me of Ebony Maw and Thanos very, very much. And just like Ebony Maw, he will be remembered pretty fondly by me. Even from a design perspective, it grabs your attention. He looks so out of place because he is completely hairless from what you can see. No
And he's
eyebrows,
very
nothing.
skinny.
Yeah, he just reminds me of Ebony Maw, except without hair on the back. And even like just without the eyebrows, he looks just so noticeable to me that I really did enjoy Peter DeVries. I thought he was interesting.
Yeah. Like the few scenes he was in, like for me there wasn't a lot for him to make an impact on, but like he was there, and the one scene where they're on the getting the soldiers, that was an interesting scene showing that he does hold this sense of power, but
Mm.
you don't exactly know why other than he is the spokesperson for the
Baron.
Baron.
um,
Talking.
for Obama. Dr. Wellington Yue, played by Chang Chen, who is a Suk doctor in the employ of House Atreides. Um, so the doctor, Dr. Yue, he has a kindly nature about him, and you get to see that he does have this personal relationship with Paul. Um, but he is not given enough screen time to make certain things as impactful as they probably should have been.
Yeah.
And according to the buddy who I saw the film with, in the book, he has a lot more presence. So that is one thing I will complain about. I mean, like, he's good in the role he has, especially towards the end of the film.
Yeah.
But there's just not enough for the twists and the spoilers to have the same impact.
Yeah.
Anything to add?
Like he's kind of boring for me. It wasn't like a, oh, he's here. You know, it's like, oh, anyways, there's the main character with him. That's how I felt with him. Like I wasn't generally impacted by him.
So let's talk about Dr. Liette Kynes, who is portrayed by Sharon Duncan Brewster. She's the Imperial Ecologist and Judge of the Change on Arrakis. Um, so she was the
The
one,
girl that went with them on the ship to go check out the
yes,
machine.
sent
Okay.
sent by the Emperor.
She was interesting. It. I wish we got more of her, but that, you know, certain things happen. But she was interesting. She didn't. She felt like she's a key to a piece that will be explained later on.
Mm.
But she understood that the main character has this knowledge of the people on here, and you find out later that she's one of them.
I was gonna leave that part out of the light spoiler territory, but okay, we're just gonna throw it in there.
Yeah, just kind of casually throw that in. Um, but she was interesting for what she got.
Yeah, like she does a decent job with definitely one of the drier characters. That being said, this is not like a MCU look at my funny one-liners movie. There's not very many funny moments in the film. It doesn't need them, by the way. That's not a complaint. But she is, even with that in mind, she's one of the drier characters in the film. And that mild twist of her, in fact, being Fremen doesn't save her from being lost in a sea of better performances going on around her. She's not
It's just
bad.
this movie was full of great performances, and when given a more dry character, she was just stuck with it.
Yeah, like, so, like, the way I kind of look at it is she's not bad. She just
No.
doesn't stand out like, say, Lido or
Yeah.
Paul or Gurney Halleck or even for me, Peter DeVries. I put her on like the same level as Dr. Yue.
You know what I'm gonna put is that this movie, when I'm thrown into something with all these different characters and all that, there's not like this thing about them. I forget. I've forgotten all their names. And so you saying their names, I'm like, I don't know who he's
To
talking about.
to be fair, very few of these names are said more than once, if at
Yeah.
all. Which
Yeah, I
is, I did a lot of research for this.
Yeah.
Like, walking out of the theater, even though I ended up seeing it twice in theaters, I couldn't have told you Thufir Hawat's name.
No.
I think it's
Even
said once in the
Paul.
film. Well,
I
Paul.
can't. Well, to me, like I'm paying attention to a story and character, but names just for some reason don't click with me.
Paul's an easy
Vincent,
name, though.
I just don't even remember him being called Paul.
I don't know what to say to that. So let's see how well you can't see it, but I can see. Let's see how confused his face gets as we talk about our final three here. So we have Gaius Helen Moyhayem. I hope I said the last name right. Portrayed by Charlotte Rampling, Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother, and the Emperor's Truthsayer. And Rampling, she's not in many scenes, but she does have quite the performance in those
Oh my
couple of
goodness.
scenes.
I'm like, yeah, no, I don't want to deal with her.
Yeah,
She gives that vibe of an evil librarian.
yeah, oh, yeah. She looks so old and frail, and yet everyone's afraid of her, and then you kind of see why, and it's like, okay, I'm afraid of her too. It's a solid performance. It's very brief. She's in only one scene of substance, and then one other scene slightly later.
Mm-hmm.
The next character, I assume you will have stuff to say about, whether or not you recognize the name or not. I didn't choose the order to put these in, by the way. This was the Wikipedia character list from how they sorted who was most important. I was surprised this name was so low. Duncan Idaho,
Yep.
who is portrayed by Jason Momoa, Aquaman.
I actually remembered his name.
Well, there you go. He is the sword master of House Atreides and one of Paul's mentors. Why don't you start us off with Duncan Idaho?
I really like Duncan. He felt like this big brother to Paul. You know? He's like, he's up and going, yet he can keep it tied down and serious at the same time. And he's not given this role that he has as haphazardly. Like, he feels like he fits this role, what he's doing right. He's put to infiltrate and to look around and to learn about the culture. And he does great. You know, there's nothing that felt wrong about what his character does. It felt great. He felt strong and has this presence that you won't forget.
Yeah. Momoa is a very good actor, and he looks to be having like the time of his life as he's playing Idaho, and Idaho is absolutely epic. When I first saw the film, he was my favorite character. It was only on second viewing that I got to appreciate Lido more. But he has the best action scenes in the film, in my opinion. We'll talk a bit more about that later on.
Oh, yeah.
But like, man, Jason Momoa is Duncan Idaho. Like, wow. So finally, let's talk about Stilgar, portrayed by Javier Bardem, the leader of the Fremen tribe at Sietch Tabor. Maybe.
Maybe.
So he's the leader of the Fremen tribe. That's the point. Bardem, I love his voice. He has this like gravitas to his voice. And that really elevates Stilgar because otherwise his like part and his lines is really boring.
Yeah.
With someone with a plain voice like you or I, the character would have just been extremely boring. And while he's still on the boring side, Bardem's performance does save the character from being the worst in the film, in my opinion, anyway. Anything you to add?
Like again, he's shown to be a good warrior. I think that was interesting, and I hope they just with the way they've done it, because they've done pretty good to the book from what people say. Like there's a few things that aren't, but pretty much they've done fantastic with the book. And I just hope that he's in the book more for when they adapt the last part of it. And from what it seems, he's a very interesting character if he's given something.
Yeah, something to actually do. Okay, so let's get into the effects. Excuse me, and cinematography. Um, right out the gate, the effects are spectacular in this movie. Um, there was not a single effect on either viewing I had that I was like, that doesn't look good. I'm sure there were some that wasn't as good, but nothing jumped out at me like we had in Eternals or No Way Home or Spider-Man 2. Nothing jumped out at me like that. But I especially want to give a shout out to the sandworms, as well as the various ships in this film. The ships and the sandworms looked absolutely gorgeous. Over to you.
I for a compared to a Marvel movie which has huge budgets and all that, this movie looked better than some of those huge budget Marvel movies.
Mm-hmm.
When you are given those resources, I find they don't use them sparingly and they throw it around too easily. But when you're tied down to a one singular movie that's not an entire universe that's making billions of dollars,
Yeah.
you have to be careful where you spend it. And they spend it everywhere perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
They knew how to balance it, and it did not cost them as much as a Marvel movie.
Yeah.
And when you see these cinematography scenes, when you see the ships, when you see the long shots of a battlefield, they're amazing.
Mm-hmm.
They look great. That one scene where they're running through the ships as they're falling down and they're everything just, it looks amazing. You feel like you are in the middle of a battlefield where you don't know who's gonna win.
Yeah, actually, one of the things I wish I did, I wish I saw this movie in D-Box. I think especially that sequence would have been incredible in the D-Box seats.
Like, even in IMAX alone, it was great. But
Mm.
in a D-Box or go over to another city where they have the 4D seats, where it's
Oh
like a
boy.
fully imagine, like, it would have been great.
Yeah. And it's I think one of the reasons why the effects stand up so well is they did so many practical effects where they could as well. Like they built most of these sets for when they needed to have people in. Like establishing shots, there's no need for people. They can do just a nice like CGI. But like so many of these sets seemed practical that like we've talked about in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, the hallway sequence in Ta Lo.
There's so much CGI.
Where it wasn't needed. They could have built it.
Yeah.
And Dune really feels like there was a lot of practical, and the blend of practical and CGI is so well done. You can't even tell.
And they save so much budget on that. And plus, it takes less time than spending thousands of hours trying to figure out how to computer generate a scene.
Absolutely.
So, in all honesty, Dune does better with setting up practical effects and doing all these things than what Marvel's doing with half their effects.
Marvel doesn't often do practical effects.
No.
That's one of the things that make the sequel trilogy of Star Wars, specifically Force Awakens, look so good, is there was so many practical effects in that.
Yeah.
But Marvel doesn't do a ton of practical effects. So just to transition to the cinematography, as you brought it up, yeah, cinematography was spectacular as well. Every shot you can tell was like meticulously chosen and beautiful, and you can tell that the director Denis Villeneuve really, this was a passion project for him. He must love the book to put this much care and attention to it.
Well, I did some look up on like him because just in interviews I've seen for the movie, like he was a big fan of this book when he was younger.
He would have had to have been to like care this much.
That's what he was. Like he enjoyed those books, and he's like, imagine if it was done well, because he saw that movie and he thought it's a good movie to him, but it wasn't
sure fans
what
like
he wanted. So he made this with passion, and they saved money from a Marvel movie, and they made it look better than a Marvel movie.
Mm-hmm. Like to really like hit the nail on the head for the point, just think back to the tent scene. The scene I mentioned with Lady Jessica and Paul, they're in a tent at night. Paul has a vision, and they do this cut between his vision, which is set in daytime, and the darkness of this tent at night with limited lighting. It is blinding and quite jarring.
Oh yeah.
But there's a it's a brilliant shot choice because it's supposed to feel this jarring two different emotions, and just going from dark to light, it was, and
You're
it's not
getting
that fast.
flashbanged and you're going blind, but you're like, wow.
This is brilliant.
And even like when they do those scenes of him interacting with the spice in the air and all that,
Yeah, the slow mo
it
with
is
that.
interesting and it's cool to look at. And I think one of my favorite shots, other than them running through the shipyard when all the ships are coming down and there's explosions everywhere, is when they come out of the tent and they are looking across the distance, seeing the city like engulfed.
Mm.
And it just looks great.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the writing and the score. And for the first time in what feels like a long time, I get to say this. I may not have said this in any of our previous reviews, but I get to say it now. The writing really impressed me. It had, as we mentioned earlier, so much work to do to build this universe that we know nothing about, but it does it so well that you leave the movie not confused. You may not know everything, but you're not feeling confused. And yet, there doesn't feel like there was too much of an exposition dump like Eternals had.
No.
The writing, for probably the first review, the writing really impressed me. It was just like, man, that is a real well-written movie. A well-written movie. There it is. Put it
There
on a
we go.
t-shirt. Well-written movie.
It'll be a part of our merchandise.
There it is. The merchandise line. Barrel though and well-written movie.
The score.
I'm not
This
ready for
was
score
great,
yet.
but not yet. But the writing was fantastic. When you watch movies, and a lot of them are just off comic books, so a lot of it is just things thrown together, and it goes with it. You're not expecting a whole lot. It's an action Marvel movie. But when you hit a movie like this, a solo movie, or like a movie that doesn't need all this tie into other things, it feels good. It feels interesting. It's like when you watch like the Inception movie or Interstellar. It has that feeling of this is an interesting story where the writing is very important because there might be a sequel after, but most likely not. For Dune, there is a sequel coming because of the book, but it's not like this whole 23 movie thing that they're creating. It is 2 movies, maybe 3, and it is tied down, and it was great.
Yeah. That's the interesting thing is that when Denis Villeneuve got the green light to make this film, he was not greenlit. Wow, he was not greenlit to do a part 2, and he only did it because the movie did so well, and thank goodness it did well. One line I want to mention that I keep coming back to when I think about the lines of the film that I like is right after we mentioned Dave Bautista's shouting. Right after that, Baron Harkonnen's first line in the film. He says, "When is a gift not a gift?" And he never explains what it is, but if you are a discerning moviegoer, you can fill in the blank that when is a gift not a gift? When it's a trap. And just absolute chills. That line was so, and the fact that he just leaves it hanging and lets you fill in the blank, I love that. It was such a good line.
Oh, well, like the one line that I mentioned, when they're talking. What's the scene that I talked about where they talk about the mother of Paul being a concubine to the Duke? Um,
Like when it's just the Duke
I
and her
think
talking
that's it.
in the
It's
bedroom.
either that or there's another one where when it's the Baron, that scene when
Oh
they're
yeah,
at the
yeah,
table
yeah.
and they mention that was interesting to me because you don't hear, they use a lot of older dialect
Mm-hmm.
that you don't hear in movies anymore. How often, who in their minds have ever heard concubine unless you've read the Bible or something?
Or watched Mulan from
Oh,
Disney, actually, but you do
okay.
have a point. It's not a
It,
common term.
it's not a term that you heard, and it caught me off guard, and it pulled me in even more. So when I watched it the second time, I was already pulled in because I knew that they use these different terms in these different ways, and it made me engaged with the story even more the second time.
Yeah, this is definitely one that benefits from repeated viewings. And I just want to say to everyone out there, if you miss seeing it in theaters, I'm sorry.
You've missed out.
Yeah, you can definitely watch afterwards. It'll still be a great movie, but the theater was something special to behold. So I know I reeled you in last time, so why don't you go ahead and open us up on the score side of things?
Oh man, that score. Hans Zimmer. Every movie he does, his score is just amazing. And this movie was no different. From not usually a lot of movies nowadays, the score isn't like this huge thing, you know.
As
It
we've
doesn't,
talked about.
yeah, it doesn't feel like it is this important thing that needs to be in a movie. But with this movie, with that amazing score they had, it made you even more immersed in this film. It really reminded me that films need this amazing score that keeps everyone reminding. If it is a boring, uninteresting one, you're still gonna enjoy the movie, but not as much as if the score was amazing. You know, it's like when we watch the Tobey Maguire movies. When I watch them, and you hear that Spider-Man theme, you know, that's like, oh, you know, it's Spider-Man time. You know, when you watch Inception and you have that theme that Hans Zimmer did, and it is like this intense thing. Even Batman versus Superman. A lot of people crap on it. It's not a great movie. I understand, but that score is great in that movie.
Yeah, Hans
Like,
Zimmer is seriously talented. He
I have
is,
anything. It is just praise for the man.
yeah, he is, in my opinion, the second best movie score composer there is after John Williams himself.
Yeah.
And that is such incredible praise to give a composer. And there are a lot of great ones out there. Think about like Michael Giacchini, and there are a lot of great like score composers out there. But John Williams was always a cut above everyone else. Hans Zimmer is up on that same shelf with him. They are
Yeah.
so good. Because, yeah, the score was freaking phenomenal. That's also probably the first time we've got to say that as well so far.
Before doing the podcast, I was listening to the score to like remind myself, and I'm like, "This is still great." I don't remember the context of these scores, but they
Mm-hmm.
are intense. You know,
Yeah.
it's a great time.
And the score is more in your face than many films I've seen recently, but
Yeah,
that is part of why it's so good. Because it's a
yeah,
strong score, so they feature it more. It's like they're like, this is fire, let's put it in front. Because
yeah,
there's a lot of scenes where there is little to no dialogue. And without that score, even if you go for like a general Marvel score, it would still have the same impact. But because of how good the score is, it makes those quiet scenes just go like, and
yeah.
like that's some of the strongest
It
memories I
it
have of the film
makes
are these
you
scenes.
hold that interest of the movie. It doesn't
Absolutely.
pull away because there's no dialogue and you're just kind of seeing stuff. But because of that score, it just again, as you said, it pops. You're
Yeah.
getting that. You're just like you feel like you're learning things still about the story because of this amazing score that goes with it.
Yeah. As you can tell, we absolutely love the score. But if I could highlight just one specific score I love, the one that plays when Paul takes his final walk on the shore of Caladan, their home before they go to Arrakis. It's a completely silent scene except for the score, and that score just woo! It fits that scene so well. Just dang. Um, anything else you wish to say?
No.
All right. Warning, warning. Heavy spoilers ahead. You got that right. It's heavy spoiler time, folks. So, as we've taken to doing it, because it's so much more effective, we'll go chunk by chunk by chunk and analyze as we go. Let's hit it with our first chunk. In the far future, Duke Lido of House Atreides, ruler of the ocean planet Caladan, is assigned by the Padishah, I hope, Emperor Shaddam Corino IV to replace House Harkonnen as fief rulers of Arrakis. Is there anything here I need to explain? Caladan is the ocean-based world where the Atreides house was. I have no idea what Padishah means, but he is the emperor of the humans, essentially. Shaddam Corino IV is just his name. And fief, if you aren't up on your medieval terminology, a fief is essentially a ruler of a piece of land and a bunch of people, also known as duke. Arrakis, contrary to Caladan, is a harsh desert planet and the only source of spice, a valuable substance that bestows its users heightened vitality and expanded consciousness. It also turns their eyes a brilliant blue. It is critical for interstellar travel as it allows Spacing Guild navigators to use a limited form of prescience to safely navigate interstellar space. It's kind of like gives them the force ability to tell what's happening so they can navigate through space. Instead of computers, which they don't have, they have to rely on space. In reality, Shaddam intends to have House Harkonnen stage a coup to retake the planet with the aid of the Emperor's Sardaukar troops, eradicating House Atreides, whose influence threatens Shaddam's control. Sardaukar is essentially, just think of an elite, massive army specifically for the Emperor, not allied to any house. They're the top
like if
soldiers.
Death Troopers in Rogue
Yes,
One
exactly.
were just this mass army instead of this personal bodyguard.
Exactly. And our chunk concludes with Lido is apprehensive, but he sees the political advantages of controlling the Spice Planet and forming an alliance with its native population, skilled fighters known as the Fremen. So that handles the opening narration up until Leto agreeing to take the planet. Over.
I like the opening scene of this movie. You're thrown straight into it. You are thrown into this narration by Zendaya, and she's explaining things. And she has a bigger role than we kind of explained, but she's like the narrator of the story.
Yeah.
But when you see that action scene at the beginning, it really tells you what type of movie you're coming into. This is not a movie where it's like it's already in war. No, it's in peace and it's all that. There is unbalance in this universe. There are things that happen. There are things in the past that have happened. You are just in this chunk of time that you're now experiencing that will now change the rest of the course of history for this universe. And that's where you start off from. And you see the Fremen, how they work an attack, and it is a lethal, just surprise way they work. They jump up from the sand, from where you could have even guessed, and you're dead.
Yeah.
And you see explosions. There are just so many crazy things that are happening. And then it brings you into the narration of them leaving, them going places, and just all these different things. And it was just interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then it brings you to Paul. It's tied down. It's calmer. And then it shows his ability of his voice. And you're like, whoa, this is interesting. And you're just still learning things.
Yeah. All right. Our next chunk. Leto's concubine, Lady Jessica, is an acolyte of the Bene Gesserit, an exclusive sisterhood whose members possess advanced physical and mental abilities, including said voice. As part of their centuries-long breeding program, the Bene Gesserit instructed Jessica to bear a daughter whose son would become a male Bene Gesserit called the Kwisatz Haderach, a messianic super being with the clairvoyance necessary to guide humanity to a better future. Instead, she bore the son, Paul. Throughout his life, Paul is trained by Leto's aides, Duncan Idaho, Gurley Halleck, and Mentat Thufir Hawat, while Jessica trains Paul in Bene Gesserit disciplines. Paul confides in Jessica and Duncan that he is troubled by visions of the future. Because of these visions, the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiem visits Caladan and subjects Paul to a deadly test to assess his impulse control, which was seen in the trailers, which he passes. Mohiem instructs House Patriarch Baron Vladimir Harkonnen to spare Paul and Jessica during his coup, to which he duplicitously agrees. Chunk 2.
So even though you kind of saw her when they first arrived on the planet to do that negotiation, like, hey, you want to go to the spice planet and all that, you only see her. You don't know much about her, but you see the concubine have fear in her eyes when you see her.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, okay, so what is she? And then they show you what she is. And you're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And I think it was interesting how it is this menace. You know, like when Paul walks in and then his mother walks out, and then she uses the voice on Paul. And he's instantly in front of her. and he to bow, and it's just like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I see, you're not kidding, and it's just all this interestingness, and then it's just this intense scene of him having his hand in a box and be like, "You'll die if you try to pull it out." And you're like, "What?"
Yeah, and
Like,
what's in the box? Unimaginable pain. It's just,
yeah.
oh.
What I'm thinking when I see the trailer with it, I'm like, "This would be a spider or something that's just gonna climb out of it. It's gonna jump scare." No, none of that happened.
You never see what was in the box.
It's just this sense of pain. You're like, "What the heck did he just experience?"
Exactly.
And then that scene in the rain when they go and talk to her, and that again, amazing scene. It
Mm-hmm.
just looks so good.
Absolutely. All right, chunk number 3. House Atreides arrives at Arrakis, the fortress stronghold on Arrakis, where Duncan and an advance party have been learning about the planet and the Fremen. Lido negotiates with the Fremen's chieftain Stilgar and meets planetologist and imperial judge Dr. Liet Kynes. Kynes informs Lido, Paul, and Halleck of the dangers of spice harvesting, including giant sandworms which travel under the desert. During a flight, they spot a sandworm approaching an active spice harvester with a stranded crew. Lido and his team rescue the workers moments before the sandworm swallows it. Paul's exposure to spice-laden air triggers intense premonitions. There's chunk 3. That sums up a pretty incredible sequence in of just a few words, but that whole sequence with the sandworm and the spice harvester, dang!
Yeah, it's intense. And when you see them running back to the ship, and you see that shockwave of the sand just dropping, just come at them, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
wow.
It's our first look at a sandworm, but it is not our best look at one. But boy, does it ever! It's the sandworms in this film are very much like the shark in the original Jaws. You don't see them much. You see signs of them, and then when you actually see it, whereas with Jaws, it's this moment of oh, it's right there. But the sandworm is like holy cow!
It is coming. It is not something that doesn't just come out of nowhere. You know it's coming, but it's this sense of it is coming fast, and what do we do?
Yeah.
You know?
Whereas with like a shark, you have options.
Yeah.
What do you do when there is a massive sandworm coming at you and you are in its home? What do you do?
Yep. Exactly. You're trapped basically, unless you could just fly out of there. And I also like how in this chunk it shows how the Duke and them were set up to be doing poorly on this planet.
Yep.
How they're supposed to fill all these things, and half of them are broken. How the machines aren't great; they're falling apart, and all these things. And that's why they did this. You know?
Sabotage.
And you're like, oh, this is interesting. You know?
Yeah. All right. Our next chunk. After an attempt on Paul's life by a Harkonnen agent, Lido places his soldiers on high alert. Sook Dr. Wellington Yue disables Arakin's shields and allows Harkonnen and Sardaukar troops to overwhelm the Atreides forces. Yue incapacitates Lido and tells him he made a deal to deliver him to the Baron in exchange for freeing his captive wife. Yue replaces one of Lido's teeth with a poison gas capsule and is killed after delivering the Duke. Lido releases the poison gas, killing himself and members of the Baron's court, including Peter de Vries, but the Baron survives. Duncan Idaho escapes and steals an ornithopter, which is a helicopter that looks like a dragonfly. It's really cool. An ornithopter. Harkonnens capture Paul and Jessica and take them into the desert to die. Paul and Jessica overpower and kill their captors using a Bene Gesserit skill, the voice. Finding a survival kit left for them by Yue, Paul and Jessica spend the night in a tent. Paul experiences visions of a holy war spreading across the universe in his name. Boom! This chunk is intense.
There was so much happening.
Yeah.
Like, again, that scene of them when they are aware of what's happening and everything starts coming together, and you're like, oh my goodness, they're here, and you see the troops rolling up, and they're just ripping everyone to shreds.
Yeah.
It was like, for a PG-13 movie, this was intense, and it was lethal.
Absolutely.
They were not holding back.
Absolutely.
They were going right there. their shown force and seeing them run across the shipyards, like get to the ships, and then just boom, 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 it's like, oh,
Yeah. The
so
the
much action.
cast was very big at the start. It's not so big at this point of the film.
It shrinks fast.
Mhm. But I think what might surprise a lot of people is there is still about a half an hour, if not 40 minutes left in the film after this point. So let's talk about what comes next.
Wait, the vision that Paul has, is that the one where he's in the suit and he's fighting the Sakaar? Or is
The
that a
solder
later one?
car. Yeah, that's the one that he has.
When that mask pops up, that is the worst CGI in that entire movie.
Mm.
His face does not fit in there, and it does not look right whatsoever. And I'm like, okay, if there's anything to criticize in this movie, it is that one thing.
I didn't
And
even
it bothered
notice.
me. As soon as I saw it, I was like,
Our final chunk, which covers the rest of this film. The Baron hands over command of Arrakis to Rabin, Dave Bautista, due to the gas that he was exposed to, but he survived it, and orders him to sell spice reserves and restart production to recover the cost of the coup. Paul and Jessica are found by Duncan and Liet Kynes and head to an old research station, but are quickly tracked by the Sardaukar. Duncan and various Fremen sacrifice themselves to allow Jessica, Paul, and Kynes to escape the facility. Kynes separates and is ambushed by Sardaukar troopers, so she lures a sandworm that devours them along with her. Paul and Jessica reach the deep desert and meet the Fremen, among them Stilgar and Shani, the girl in Paul's visions. Fremen warrior Jamis protests to their admission with the group and is killed by Paul in a ritual duel to the death. Against Jessica's wishes, Paul insists on joining the Fremen to fulfill his father's goal of bringing peace to Arrakis. This is where we get the best look at a sandworm, and then there's another instance with the sandworm with Liet Kynes. Before they find the Fremen, you get an amazing look at the sandworms spanning across the screen.
This is the reason why I actually enjoy when it's a two-part movie and it's based off something that's already happened, so they have something to work with. What I like so much is that the first half of this movie is action-packed, it's jam-packed with all this stuff, and the second half is where it lets you start to relax.
Mm.
And they
I
can
wouldn't say
only
half,
do that.
but the last bit.
The last part, they let you relax. Every movie, the formula is it goes up, and then near the end, it's the peak, and then it goes down. And here it was starting off at already a high point. It hits its peak, and then it starts to go down, while still having those spikes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what is more interesting, is when you go against that movie formula because you have the ability to when you have a two-parter.
Yeah.
Or
yeah,
a
that's true.
I don't know. And there was so much that it was, as you said before when we were talking about the score, there was a lot of not dialogue.
Yeah, especially
just,
in the back half.
and that's why the score was so important for this movie. Because if it hadn't, I feel like that last part, with all that less dialogue and all that, it would have brought the movie down for people.
Especially coming after that intense climax that comes before I think anybody was ready for it.
Yeah. It was just, there's so much that's thrown at you, and then all of a sudden it just kind of lets you process it while seeing what they're going through.
Yeah. There is one of the few complaints I will level at the film, although not my biggest complaint, which I haven't talked about yet, is the fact that the climax happens so early, is that my favorite character, Lido, is killed with still a significant amount of film left. Now, mind you, the story doesn't work if he lives. I'm not saying I wish he lived. I just wish we had more time with Oscar Isaac's incredible performance. But it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's not a major complaint.
No.
So before we go to our favorite, least favorite scene, what'd you think? Like, before, not even in the rating, just, we talk a lot about the impact of, like, an MCU film on the MCU. But what about the impact on us? Not a rating, just how'd you feel after seeing this film?
It made me feel like there's more than just Marvel movies, because that's what it's felt like throughout the years. Now, there's a lot of movies I'm going to see is a Marvel movie, and it felt nice walking out of a movie that I really enjoyed and felt really into. That wasn't a superhero movie. It was something that felt like a Star Wars movie and a Star Trek movie and a medieval movie thrown into one.
Mm.
That's the vibe I got from it, and it felt so new and interesting to me, and I liked it.
Mm.
I felt good walking out of it.
Yeah. Now I watch a lot more movies than Nick does, so it doesn't seem to me the overwhelming of Marvel. Although I definitely get why you say that, because there's a lot of Marvel content happening. There's a lot of superhero content happening.
Yeah.
This movie redeemed an entire franchise for me. I had seen that original Dune film and had written it off, and then my friends would talk about like Dune books and games and comics, and I'd just be in the back of my mind, never, nope. But now, I'd give it a shot. This redeemed an entire franchise for me. And how many movies can you say redeems a franchise? I mean, like, say you were to watch The Incredible Hulk, which in my opinion is the worst MCU film. There is no one MCU film you could watch that would redeem the entire franchise. Because if, say, you were to watch Infinity War, my favorite MCU film, you'd just be confused. You have to watch it all, and then the franchise definitely gets redeemed just from, say, watching the rest of Phase 1, definitely redeems The Incredible Hulk. This is one film that redeemed an entire franchise for me.
Yep.
It was incredible. So let's go to our favorite, least favorite scene. I'll start with favorite, and then we'll go your favorite, and then we'll transition to least, and you'll go first. So my favorite scene, despite not being my favorite character anymore, Duncan Idaho's last stand. He went out like an absolute champion. Like, I was sad to see him go, but man, that is how you go out right there.
Like, he's like straight up impaled, and he's still fighting them.
Yeah, like he gets impaled twice, and then he drops to the ground, and then they start cutting through the door, and then just behind him you see him stand up. And he's just, like, in the back of my mind, I'm just like, second win, boys, let's go.
He's still going for it.
Yeah.
Favorite scene? It's either you know what? No, there's the one sequence that took it for me is them running across that shipyard and all that chaos, yet not feeling like this mess of explosions. It's like
not a Michael Bay film here.
No, it felt like a Michael Bay film explosion. It felt like a movie that had a reason for all these explosions. Like,
yeah,
it felt intense. It is where everything is getting thrown on its tides because at that point, you don't know who's gonna win. You just see everything happening, and you're just like, oh.
Yeah. I would like to give an honorable mention for a favorite scene to the conversation between Lido and Paul back on Caladan. Love that scene too. Least favorite scene, go ahead.
I think my least favorite scene, I don't know, it's hard, but it'd probably be some of the dream sequences where it'd be like the same dream, but they changed it. Because I felt like, okay, but why? Maybe with the second movie, it makes sense, but for now, I'm like, why show one and then change it later on? Because I don't really understand why they're doing it.
Mine might be a little controversial, but I'm explain why it is. But to me, it is the ending scene. I understand that it's part 1, but given the knowledge that they weren't guaranteed a part 2, could you imagine if that was it? In my opinion, it is the job of every film to feel like a completed movie. And in my opinion, the ending is too abrupt to make it feel like a completed movie. I'd be fine sitting there for another half hour to get to a more natural stopping point than the one we got. I understand why they did it. They were counting on that part 2. But because of the pandemic, if it didn't make enough money to get a part 2, there would just be fanboy tears to fund your film, and you ain't going to get very far with that. That's my biggest complaint about the film, and in the grand scheme of things, it's a minor complaint. This film was very, very good. Yeah. I just wish the ending felt like if they didn't get to do another one, it felt better. But the fact that we're getting another one will pretty much mitigate that complaint when Dune Part 2 comes out. So
even the ones I complained about, like, they were still interesting scenes. They weren't something where you're like, okay. It was just like, I felt a little off when you see the same scene, just a few things changed about it. And I'm like, okay, but why? But it's just because, it's that interest of, I want to know everything right now. But because of it being a two-parter type movie, you can't just know everything.
Mm-hmm. All right. Our overall rating. Why don't you fire first?
What did I give No Way Home?
97% was No Way Home.
I'm going to give this a 95.
95%?
It's up there for me.
So while not my favorite film I've seen this year, it is the best made film I'd seen this year, unquestionably. That came out this year. Even ones that I watched that didn't come out this year. This is the best made film, hands down. So when I give something a rating, I consider both aspects of it. I consider my personal feelings and then how good the movie is. And once again, I only write down my side of it. Nick doesn't go off a script. He doesn't see my rating. He just says it. But for back-to-back reviews, 95%. We got the same one again. Back-to-back reviews of the same score. Second best film of 2021.
Honestly, if it wasn't for No Way Home,
it would be the top. Yep.
It would have been the top.
It was great. It was really, really good.
See it.
See the movie. Yep. And if you ever get a chance to see it in theaters, if they do like a rewind, take the chance as long as it is safe to do so, as we are still in a pandemic.
Another thing I'd even like to say, just for the final bit, is even though it was a pandemic, the movie still made back its budget that it spent.
Yeah, it did very well. Not as well as No Way Home, which juggernauted for a pandemic. Even for a non-pandemic film, that movie did great.
It's like doing it. Isn't it like in the top 5 right now?
I think it's number 4 of all time, if not higher at this point. Let me take a peek. Well, you keep talking. I'll take a peek.
But for a movie like this that may not have had a huge fan base behind it, it's just like a lot of older time fans. It still did well, and it was still very captivating, and it was very interesting for people to see. And I think with the pandemic, it would have hit that $1 billion because it was just that good. But because it didn't have that full backing and everything, and it being a pandemic, it didn't hit that 1 billion mark. But I could have definitely seen that happening.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, it wasn't a huge hit, and to be frank, it probably doesn't have mass appeal, but if people would get over themselves and go and see it, they would really, really like it.
Like, Dune only grossed worldwide 397 million.
Yeah, it's not even in the top 10 of last year.
No.
Thank goodness it was enough to get renewed. So it's actually only 8th of all time when adjusted for inflation, but it's still great. Actually, that's not even just for inflation. The Lion King, the live action movie Lion King just did better than I thought it did. Never mind. I was like thinking it was the original adjusted for inflation. It's very good.
And the Dune budget was only 165 million, so they made that back 2 times.
Yeah, and that's what you look for in the film.
Yeah.
What's up next for the Great Movie Ride podcast? We're going to look at what was probably the funnest movie to watch in 2021, or at least in the top 3. Free Guy. Ryan Reynolds, amazingly funny film. Definitely in the top 5 films of 2021. We're reviewing that up next, so look forward to that. 2 weeks from when you hear this is when we'll release that. So thank you ever so much for tuning in. Make sure you check out the other episodes of the Great Movie Ride podcast. We've done Eternals. We've done Shang-Chi. We've done the original Spider-Man 2. We've done No Way Home. We even did Sword Art Online Progressive, which is our most popular podcast to date. Go figure.
For some reason.
Go figure. Let's see if Dune does well. And then check out the Gmod Squad on YouTube. That's where we post a ton of content of multiplayer games, funny games, scary games, single player games. And then we stream every week on the Gmod Squad Presents on Twitch on Sundays. From the Great Movie Ride podcast, I've been Gaston.
I've been Jerryofdom.
And we'll see you in the movies. Good night, everybody.
Good night.